Good evening, everyone. I'm Jay Lyon, the Executive Director of the Geographic Society of Chicago. I want to thank you for attending this, the fifth in a webinar series hosted by the GSC and DePaul University. Tonight's program is called Chicago's Southeast Side, Will the Past Inform the Future? We have a great panel tonight to share their experiences. Our discussion tonight will be moderated by Professor Heather Smith from DePaul University. Heather is an urban planner and an adjunct professor of geography at DePaul University. Her work is centered at the intersection of urban planning, environmental justice, and equity. She has more than 20 years of nonprofit experience, most recently as a senior program officer at the Field Foundation of Illinois. She is a member of the leadership team of Chicago Regional Organizing for Anti-Racism and serves on the American Planning Association's Illinois Chapter Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Heather holds a bachelor's degree in urban studies and Japanese from Macalester College and a master's in urban planning from Columbia University. So please welcome Heather Smith.
Great. Thank you, Jay, and thanks to everyone for being with us tonight. As this is Earth Week and we're coming up on Earth Day, we really want to use this time tonight to tell the story of Chicago's Southeast Side and highlight many of the environmental injustices still happening right now. As we're also talking about equity and racial justice, I just want to take a minute to acknowledge the events around the Derek Chauvin trial today. And as we reflect on the verdict, I just want to take a minute for everyone to take a deep breath and to encourage everyone to please take care of yourselves in these days. So as Jay said, my name's Heather and I'm going to be your moderator tonight. Thank you for that introduction. I'm an urban planner and I really have built a career around Chicago nonprofits and racial justice work. And in my adjunct professor role at DePaul, I teach a variety of classes from street design to historical Chicago. But in 2018, building on the relationship that I had established when I was working at the Field Foundation with Alliance the Southeast and Amalia, I began teaching a community-based service learning class, working in partnership with Alliance for the Southeast, or ASE in South Chicago. Over the past 3 years, my students have created maps and infographics to assist with ASE's campaigns. I should also note, I'm from the South Side, though not South Chicago, but I've spent a lot of time both on the Little Calumet River, and I did spend a summer working at the YMCA in South Chicago. So I have a great affection for the Southeast Side. What I'm going to do is introduce the other panelists, but first I'm going to share my screen so you don't have to look at just my talking head and take you through a bunch of images. Oops. There we go. And I'll have this slideshow running in the background to show off many of the assets on the Southeast Side. You'll see many sites, including the former US Steel site at 87th and the Lake, which is an area more than twice the size of the Loop. When I introduce the Southeast Side to my classes, I want to point out that I use the framework of asset-based community development, or ABCD. That's an institute actually within DePaul. And what ABC does is sets up a framework with the premise that you start looking at assets in the community instead of using the term disinvested communities, and that the glass is always half full. You see a list of assets on this slide. And assets are comprised of community institutions, parks, block clubs, businesses, and especially people who are the assets that bring many talents, and they know best how to improve their communities. And now we're going to hear from some of them. I urge you to visit these places and enjoy the neighborhood. And I'm delighted to introduce tonight some of the Southeast Side's biggest assets: Peggy Salazar, Amalia Nieto Gomez, and Oscar Sanchez. So what I'm going to do is we're going to run through all three presentations. I will introduce all the speakers, and then we'll take questions at the very end. So starting with Peggy, Peggy Salazar is a lifelong resident of Southeast Chicago. Growing up across the street from what was then U.S. Steel, she became accustomed to and accepting of the daily grit and grime associated with the steel industry. Venturing outside of her neighborhood when she became older afforded her the awareness that all neighborhoods neither looked nor smelled like hers. Married with 2 children, her husband lost his job when U.S. Steel shuttered its facility for good in 1992, and all seemed bleak. But then the realization that the community would now have a chance to be reborn and transformed into a healthier, cleaner, more desirable place to live made her very hopeful. But when her community didn't get any cleaner or smell any better, after all the mills had been shuttered, it became apparent that the source of the dirt and grime blanketing her community had not been only from the steel industry, but from all the industry along the Calumet River. When she had the opportunity to join the board of directors of the Southeast Environmental Task Force in 2005, she did so with the intent to eliminate or reduce the amount of pollution in the area to help usher in the change for a better community. Peggy was asked to serve as the executive director of Southeast Environmental Task Force in 2010. Peggy's ties to the community and her passion for environmental advocacy and awareness have helped the task force carry out its mission to improve the quality of life for all residents on Chicago's Southeast Side. Next up, we have Amalia Nieto Gomez. She is the executive director of Alliance of the Southeast. She is also the co-director of the Coalition for a Southworks CBA, that's Community Benefits Agreement, a diverse and broad-based coalition of over 40 organizational members, including churches, schools, businesses, block clubs, youth, and nonprofits on Chicago's Southeast Side. The coalition is working to bring opportunities and economic stability to Chicago's Southeast Side by ensuring jobs, education, training opportunities, affordable housing, and environmental protections for local residents. The coalition is also developing a jobs pipeline to connect residents to jobs and training opportunities. Amalia has organized around neighborhood safety, community benefits agreements, tenants' rights, asthma, predatory lending, immigrant rights, and education. She's worked with housing tenants who won $1.6 million in HUD funding for capital improvements, and she directed a statewide coalition resulting in the first anti-predatory lending city ordinance in the US. Amalia graduated from Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of International Affairs with a minor in Latin American Studies. And last but not least, we have Oscar Sanchez. Oscar is a proud, active community member, born and raised on Chicago's Southeast Side. Currently, Oscar is the Youth and Violence Prevention Organizer for Alliance for the Southeast, developing youth leaders who are currently working to increase access to mental health services for youth and police-free schools. He is also a member of the Coalition for a Southworks CBA and co-founder of the Southeast Response Collective, which is a local mutual aid network. Before working at ASE, Oscar founded the Southeast Youth Alliance. Oscar was one of the original hunger strikers in the campaign against General Iron. That's a metal trading company with a long history of air pollution violations. Under former Rahm Emanuel, the company started its proceedings and asking permission from the city to move from Lincoln Park to the Southeast Side. Oscar was on a hunger strike for 30 days this year, protesting that move. Oscar also has experience as a youth advocate with Young Invincibles, an Illinois Governor's Youth Commission to representative, and a Community Leadership Corps member of the Obama Foundation. So those are some of the talents of our panelists tonight. And so I'm going to stop this presentation and I would like to turn it over to our first panelist, Peggy Salazar.
Good evening, everybody. Sorry about that. I'm going to be fumbling around because old age and technology don't always go together. In any case, I'm glad that you can join us. I'll start with a little slide presentation giving you a historical background for our environmental situation on the Southeast Side. And so let me get my screen up. We can start. Okay, so we're going to talk about the history of the Southeast Side, where our environmental situations and concerns come from. And we'll start with talking about what the industrial corridor is. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Southeast side, the 10th Ward is basically the area that we focus our work in, the Southeast Environmental Task Force. The 10th Ward is one of the largest wards in the city of Chicago. It takes up approximately 12,600 acres. Of the 12,600 acres, 4,000 of those acres are within the industrial corridor. And you can see here that the industrial corridor follows the river. It actually encompasses some of Lake Calumet. And of course, there are reasons for that. We are an industrial hub. We have rail, we have water, and we have the expressways. So it really is a transportation hub. It makes doing business along the river and transporting things very easy. So what is a blessing for industry can sometimes be a curse for the community. So in the beginning, the southeast side of Chicago was once dominated and defined by heavy industry. The region supplied 95% of the metropolitan area's jobs in the metal industries. That industry helped win wars. It built skyscrapers and supported communities. U.S. Steel alone employed 20,000 people. So as a point of reference, the 10th Ward has 52,000 residents. So U.S. Steel alone employed 20,000 people. So I want you to wrap your head around that. And you can see U.S. Steel here, which took up 500 acres on lakefront property. But that was only one steel mill. We had Wisconsin Steel, we had Interlake, we had Republic. So 20,000 people at one steel mill didn't tell the whole story as far as employment within the steel industry. Businesses boomed as a result of all of that local investment. And here we see Commercial Avenue, which is the main commercial strip. And you can see in this photo that we had hotels, we had department stores like Goldblatt's down the street. We had movie theaters, we had jewelry stores, we had credit companies, as you can see. I mean, if you couldn't find it on Commercial Avenue, it didn't exist. But despite that economic benefits, or despite those economic benefits, the pollution took a toll on the community. So here we see, this is Calumet River. This is what it looked like when the mills were operating. You can just see the dirt, the grittiness, the grime, the air emissions, the stacks that are letting out all kinds of things. But interestingly enough, down here, and I hope you can see this, is General Mills. So this is where your Cheerios was being made. So interesting thought. In 1986, the IEPA, there was an IEPA study done in the Calumet area, and they found excessive lung, prostate cancer in males and bladder cancer in women. So this was an indication to us already that the pollution, the contamination, it was having an effect on the community. By the early 1990s, the mills were shuttered and jobs lost. Our community was devastated. Residents were looking for a rebirth of the community. We were hoping for a new beginning and new opportunities. What we inherited instead were the acres and acres of landfills, over 500 acres of landfills. We had all kinds of ruins and partially demolished structures. We had abandoned industrial sites that were fallow and vacant land. And you can see here, there's this old infrastructure where, of course, things were being dumped into the river, because this is the Calumet River right here. We had contaminated landscapes. Now, I want you to take a look at this. Nothing is growing. Nothing does grow here. So that gives you an indication of how contaminated is. An interesting thing about this also is that there is a current proposal to do land mining of limestone right here at this location. So there's a company, Ozinga, that wants to come in and do underground mining. Oh, by the way, too, for context, let me go back. These are rail cars, and they're bringing in pet coke. So that'll give you an idea of the size of this property. Here we have what looks like what could be beautiful Alps, snow-covered mountains, but it is in fact salt piles that are 4 and 5 stories high, and they're across the street. You can't see it from this view, but across the street is where there is a residential community. That residential community experiences all the corrosiveness that salt does put on their property. But I like to say that it's kind of like having the ocean view or having the impact of corrosive salt without the benefit of an ocean view. And you can see here, manufacturing was replaced by bulk storage, transfer stations, metal recycling, energy production, and waste management. More and more waste coming into our neighborhood. This is an example. This is technically waste, but it's being recycled. But these industries like this are not only polluting, but they're an eyesore. This is the famous pet coke. I'm sure that most of you have heard of petroleum coke, which is a waste product of the refining industry. And you can see it was dumped on us. And again, for context, you can see how these little vehicles that are trucks and cars and the size of the actual operation and the amount of pet coke that was being stored here. This is a different view of that same pet coke. I want you to see how close it is to a community, probably maybe a block at the most. Here's the community. And most interestingly, this is a little league field. So our children get to play little league ball next to a very polluting and contaminating type of industry. This is what the result of having those kinds of industries that put all kinds of emissions into the air are on our property values. You can see a resident here. She just swipes her siding, and this is what it looks like on her hand. And this is not gray dust. This is dirt, black, sooty pet coke. This is what our streets look like. We can have this many trucks at any given time going down the street end to end. And not only are they emitting emissions from the diesel, but they're also very kind of a safety threat, because having this size truck going down our narrow old streets can be hazardous. This is what our community looks like. So I want you to stop and realize we have some of the richest kind of industries. We have Ford, we have Cargill, we have BP, we have Koch Industries, the richest operating, profiting companies in our neighborhood. And this is what it looks like. So the question then becomes, how beneficial is it to have those kinds of industries in our community? Now, this is what we would like to see, and this is what we were hoping to see. This is the new method plant. Okay, and you can see they operate with renewable energies. They have solar panels, they have a wind turbine. On top, they have a second business, which is a greenhouse. And then the building itself is constructed with energy saving in mind. And according to talking to the employees, it's a great place to work. Now, this, again, the method plant is in Pullman, and we had hoped that this was the kind of business and buildings we would be getting in our community, but we were wrong. So why is it that we'd like to see a green economic industrial future? Why is it important? It's because the Chicago Southeast Side has an industrial legacy. Like most post-industrial areas of today, it is a heterogeneous mix of residential and industrial sites. Decades of careless regulation and toxic dumping have left behind contaminated properties. Changes in our country's economic direction have resulted in shuttered industries and lack of jobs. Our mission is to develop strategies, plans, and projects that will provide economic growth and development for Southeast Chicago in an environmentally and socially sustainable way. Now, I want you to realize we're also saying socially sustainable way, because we are convinced that the impact that that industrial corridor has on our community explains why we don't have a more livable community, a more desirable community. The green economic industrial corridor that we propose And we want to support plans for would have the highest and best use of brownfields and abandoned properties. We will reach out to attract investors, social local ownership, and small business financing. Now, we propose this information. We put it before 2 different aldermen, and we couldn't get the support we needed for it. The green industrial and economic development to address our job needs. We wanted incentives that lead to a real impact in addressing our global environmental crises. Economic investment in conserving and protecting our natural habitats. Now that, for those of you who are not familiar with the 10th Ward, one of the things that I could not show on here because I was more about the industrial side of the 10th Ward is the natural areas. We have over 1,000 acres of open green space. Some of them are newly made parks that are going under restoration as we speak. They're trying to remediate some of the properties. And so it's taking a long time because those properties had been impacted so negatively by the industry that was here. So we also want utilization of existing infrastructure and resources in a more balanced and benign way. So why does it make good sense to develop Southeast Chicago? Because it would, the increased property taxes from industrial entities. It would allow for infilling, which prevents building on green spaces by using brown ones instead. We would stop the legacy of dirty industry. We would clean up contamination that makes for a healthier community. We want to remediate brownfields so they're no longer a blight. We want to bring needed jobs and economic opportunity. We want to recycle land, since recycling is the way to go forward in any kind of area that you're working in. And we also want to be able to address global climate change. What are our challenges? Well, we have a lack of funding. We have this contamination. And when we talk about contamination, we're talking about things like benzene and chromium and lead and all of those heavy metals that are not easy to deal with. We also have unknown sources of contamination. We have purchasers that are hesitant to take on any of the liability that's associated with the properties. The cleanup adds to the cost of the property. In our cases, we have many properties where we don't know who owns them or there's no one taking responsibility for them. We have land use policies that limit the use of those sites to industrial purposes only. We have a lack of a progressive, comprehensive plan, and then we lack political will. So where are we today? Well, we are still playing whack-a-mole. We are still having to address each and every negative and harmful industrial proposal that comes our way. And I'm sure you are familiar with the latest ones, which of course were the big pet coke campaign that we were objecting to, the storing of the pet coke that you saw in that picture that took up 70 acres of property. We are now currently fighting against General Iron because we already have eight scrap metal yards. And with the addition of the General Iron business to our part of town, we will probably have, I can't even imagine how much of the scrap metal will be coming to our community, because we would then have one of the largest scrap metal operations in the entire city of Chicago, and it would be operating in our backyard. And so once again, beside the unfairness and the injustice of taking a operation, a business that one community didn't want, and putting it into our community, we just did not need any more scrap metal operations. And so we will continue to advocate for a cleaner tomorrow, a 21st century community with a progressive look to the future. And that is where we are.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peggy.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to move on to our next speaker, Amalia Nieto Gomez. Amalia, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amalia Nieto Gomez from the Alliance of the Southeast, or ASE for short. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. Here we are. So again, welcome everybody. Glad you can make it. As Peggy mentioned, the southeast side has been facing a lot in terms of what we've been facing in terms of environment. I am going to be talking about updating on some of the developments that are happening now and what the impacts are. So as Peggy mentioned, the southeast side of Chicago has been home to generations of steelworkers who literally built downtown Chicago with the steel that was made on the southeast side. When the 3 steel mills closed, we suffered from massive unemployment. And now, in the more recent generations that we've been suffering from massive divestments and funding for education, transportation, and public and social services. We're in the middle of an epidemic. And so with COVID-19, it's more important than ever that our communities are not left behind and that developments actually help our recovery. In the last 2 years, we've had 15, actually I think it's 16 now, proposed developments on Chicago's southeast side, and we know that more are on the way. 6 developments are going on right now. Several with huge environmental concerns include Invest Southwest, which is a investment in 10 neighborhoods by the city of Chicago. They're supposed to be investing $750 million in 10 neighborhoods, including South Chicago and South Shore on the southeast side. The CTA assembly plant, we are working on getting local hires and training for local residents to be able to work at the CTA assembly plant. North Point is also on the southeast side. We've been working in coalition to on local hires and businesses, making sure minority and women-owned businesses are hired and also used as suppliers. We've also been working on the Southworks General Iron Confined Disposal Facility, or CDF, and more recently, there's a proposal for Invert. So I'm going to come back and revisit the last 3 a little bit later in this presentation. So just for comparison, this is the Southworks site. This is the site of the old US Steel Southworks site. It'll be one of the largest developments taking place in the Midwest. 430 acres are to be developed, and 125 acres were set aside as parkland. It covers an area that's more than twice the size of the Loop or Chicago's downtown, and it's the last undeveloped lakefront property in the city of Chicago. It could be the largest source of jobs. With previous developers is expected to create over 100,000 jobs. And at the time, and this is several years ago now, is estimated to be a $4 billion project. However, I think that that is an underestimated amount of funding that would be needed to develop this size of property. For comparison, we are talking about equitable development. So just for comparison, on the north side of Chicago, Lincoln Park has, and near Chinatown, there are 2 developments, Lincoln Yard and the 78. Developments received over $1 billion in TIF funds, and today would not meet the definition of blighted. TIF funds are our tax funds, and they're supposed to be going to blighted communities, which I think Peggy talked about what that looks like on the southeast side. Southworks, this area that you see here, is 7 times larger than the Lincoln Yards development, and it's nearly 3 times larger than Lincoln Yards and the 78 combined. Southworks needs funds for remediation. The last Southworks deal fell through in large part because of a lack of financing and lack of funding for remediation. So what are the impacts? So as you can see here, this is where the investment has gone or not gone. So you could see that there is a lot of investment on the north side of Chicago, which are in majority white communities. And on the south and southeast sides of Chicago, there is less investment. The biggest circle here by the Southworks site, I do not believe actually that we have that funding anymore. That was TIF funds that were set aside to develop Southworks site under a previous developer, and I believe that TIF was closed out. So there's actually less funding than what this shows. The city has encouraged remaining industries that have been located in the Lincoln Yards development, the same development that received $1 billion that I mentioned before. They've encouraged businesses, remaining industries to be relocated to Chicago's southeast side. That has included General Iron and Finkel Steel. Lincoln Park residents have complained for years about the environmental impacts of these industries, and Finkel Steel is already relocated to the southeast side. The southeast side is already environmentally overburdened. As Peggy mentioned, the 10th Ward already has 8 landfills, many of them toxic. A number of current projects are toxic and impact the health of nearby residents, including the Confined Disposal Facility, or CDF, and Southworks. So here you can see the red parts of the map are the areas of Chicago that are environmentally overburdened. The yellow and blue areas are where it's less overburdened. And the blue areas have the least overburdened. And this map was produced by NRDC, the National Resource Defense Council. So you can see that this map is the opposite of where funding is going. And you can see here where the blighted communities would be. So Chicago's southeast side has 3 of the top 5 air polluting companies. The number 1 polluter is Finkel Steel, and it's relocated to the southeast side after being displaced by the Lincoln Yards development. Soon after it moved here, there was an explosion at Finkel Steel and a south side house caught on fire. And you can see the other 2 of the top 5, 3 air polluting companies on the southeast side. So just to spell that out where the air pollution is going, again, Lincoln Yards, that red dot is where Finkel Steel used to be. And you can see where the air pollution is concentrated. So this map is actually of Cook County, not just Chicago, but you can see where the largest bright red dot is on Chicago's southeast side. And this map, if I'm not mistaken, was created before Finkel Steel moved to the southeast side. So given the fact that it's the number 1 air polluter in Cook County, this we actually have more air pollution than what this map shows. The southeast side is already environmentally overburdened, exposed to numerous contaminants, and have high asthma and cancer rates as a result. And these high cancer and asthma rates are concentrated in African American and Latino communities. So this is a map of the asthma rates. You can see the largest, the area with the highest rate of asthma is where General Iron is to be located. It's the bright or dark blue area at the bottom. And Lincoln Yards in 78, where industry is coming from, has very little asthma. And same with cancer. And then just to put it in context, this is the chronic disease rates for the city of Chicago. The red areas are where the highest concentration of chronic diseases are. And again, you can see that that overlaps where the air pollution is, cancer rates and asthma rates. And like I said, this is related to air quality, and this is the air quality you can see directly relates to where the chronic disease is. And this is directly related to who lives in the communities. So on the north side is where it's a majority white population, that's in red here on the north side. The south and southeast sides of Chicago are African American and Latino, and that's where a lot of the pollution and dirty industry is being located. So General Iron. General Iron is a company that is being relocated for the Lincoln Yards and 78 developments. Lincoln Park residents have been complaining for years about the environmental impacts of General Iron, especially air and noise pollution. The company has a history of EPA violations, and they would also greatly increase truck traffic and increase air pollution due to emissions from diesel trucks. So just for this one company alone, that would mean it would increase from about 200 trucks to 1,400 trucks a week on local roads. So really quickly, I'm going to do a brief history because I know my coworker Oscar will talk a lot more about General Iron, but really briefly, the Illinois EPA approved the permit for General Iron to be moved and located to Southeast Side in 2020. The Illinois EPA said that they would not take into account past EPA or city violations, community complaints, cumulative burden, or if the community, like the Southeast Side, is a recognized environmental justice community, meaning that it was environmentally overburdened. The company had an explosion and fire on their current site in Lincoln Park last summer with the new equipment that they're planning on bringing to the Southeast Side. And it's not just General Iron that is moving here. We also have a number of other developments. This one's a picture of the confined disposal facility. We had to fight having a second confined disposal facility. Confined disposal facility is basically a toxic landfill where they put the toxic dredgings from the river. After community outcry with 8,500 signatures opposing the second proposed site, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers announced that they would instead expand the current site, which is on the lakefront. Right now, we also have another proposed toxic development called Invert that Peggy mentioned that is looking to do mining on an already polluted strip of land, which means that we have to be worried about the contaminants being released into the air, as well as just another toxic development. We are tired of being the dumping ground for the city. We are fighting environmental racism, as you can see from the maps earlier. We want a good neighbor policy with developers, not more toxic development. We want environmentally sustainable developments with living wages, resulting in careers. We want a sustainable number of jobs and community input or co-decision process, transparency, and accountability. And we've been doing a number of things to fight for that. So we held visioning sessions to define what a good neighbor policy for developers would be. Priorities include jobs training, support for local businesses and entrepreneurship, real affordable housing, so local residents can afford it, education, environment, and quality of life. We oppose toxic developments that affect our health. We want more investment, especially for remediation, and we want community benefits agreements for the developments that we do want. Community benefits agreements, or CBAs, are legal written contracts between community groups and developers that outlines commitments of both parties to the development. Out of all the developments, the only one that's paying into developments that don't have a contract is the community, and we think that should be represented in a CBA. So thank you. That's my presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amalia. I love seeing the questions come into the chat. Please put your questions into the chat. We will get to those right after our last speaker. So I would like to turn it over to Oscar Sanchez.
Fantastic. All right, great. My name is Oscar Sanchez. I am the Violence and Prevention Organizer with Alliance to the Southeast, and I'm here to talk about overall the General Iron campaign. And just want to say thank you to the co-panelists on this with Peggy Salazar and Amalia Nieto Gomez, because they have really set forth the foreground for us this campaign to be successful, and alongside other FEM leaders like Olga Bautista and Gina Ramirez. So how this whole campaign really began was in the summer of 2020, after so much civil unrest through the murder of George Floyd. Community members were transitioning and speaking, what injustice do we have to talk about in the Southeast side? And community members and organizations came together to hold local representatives accountable when it came to the movement of General Iron coming to the community. And from there, we held an action, and folks said we have to continue and build. And that's what we did. We want to say we created this coalition of, of community members, of community. And I think that's the most amazing part that really happened. From there, we kept building this community, right? And did community building through town hall meetings. With the town hall meetings, we have over 200 participants. When it came to teach-ins, we had people coming to teach-ins. We had marches, we had protests. And then we built there from going to even to Mayor Lori Lightfoot's home in November. And then things kept escalating and escalating, because I will always say this: when we organize, right? When we organize, we do this for our survival. And when people don't understand we do this all our survival, they think we're doing drastic steps. But in reality, when you are looking at your youth, when I look at my younger brothers, when I look at my 2-year-old nephew, we do these things because we want the best for them. We want the best for our families, the best for our children, the best for our future. And I always say this: if we think of children as the future, why don't we treasure them as that now and build them up now, just like we're building the community? So then that is a timeline up till November. Then December comes, the city says there's going to be a delay in the permit. We have to see things. We need the company to revise things. They can reapply. We take a rest. And then it was the second week of January. It was the final time for commentary. And the city replies to community members saying, we're going to give you another week because the company has given us another application for it to be renewed. At that point, before, the application was about 256 pages. For this second revision that we only had a week to process was about 1,156 pages that we had to review in a week. And we said, we can't let this happen. And we will always acknowledge that Chicago is an organizing city, is a city of resistance, because it was brought up by our ancestors, right? It was brought up by our steelworkers here. It was brought up by a lot of these individuals that kept wanting to make Chicago truly a city for all. And we looked at previous actions. We looked at, we thought of a hunger strike because we looked at the past actions like 2015 Diet High School. We spoke with Jeanette Taylor. It was really amazing hearing her experience. And then we looked at, for example, even Little Village from 2001, looking at their protest as well, their hunger strike. And we really see, like, we didn't think of something different. We just built off what they were having and what Chicago has been doing for many years and decades before us. So we said, okay, this permit may be released any day. How do we get the attention we need for this? How do we, put our lives on the line during a pandemic? And we set our boundaries of what we're willing to do. And, folks said, let's do this. And we did a hunger strike. And it wasn't no easy feat. Some of us got prepared, a week and a half. Some folks jumped into it, 3 days in. And it was something very challenging, something very excruciatingly painful at times, mentally and physically. I'm a person, if folks don't know this, I'm a person that's known for talking, sleeping, and eating. And for me, when I told folks that I was going to be participating, they said, how are you out of all people going to be doing this? And, we do this because if we don't do this ourselves, who else will? If we're not advocating for ourselves, who will? And we expect our local, alderwomen or local representatives to do so. But if they fail us and they decide not to, then we have to take things into our own hand. So that's why we keep going with the notion that we keep us safe, because we've had to create these actions. And a lot of news outlets, when they reached out asking, why did you take it to this extreme? Or why did you choose this? And well, we had no other choice. We've done so many actions before. And out of all those actions, now you are here talking about our story, because now it's grabbed your attention and the world's attention. And it's amazing how we've gotten international support, national support, and gained so many new relationships and allyship here in Chicago. So, that's really you know, what we did this for. And, you know, every day was hard. It was an emotional roller coaster. You know, I personally didn't know that it would have been such a toll on my mental health. You know, some days going through imposter syndrome, asking myself, am I doing enough for my community? Are we doing enough? Are we going to get through this? And, you know, I kept being grounded by the words of my nephew. And my words of my nephew, he'd always say, you know, because my brother would tell me what we were doing with the hunger strike, and one of the times that we're on the TV, he was looking at, it was broadcasting the news channel, and you know, he was yelling out hero hero, and I'm, oh, he's watching Spider-Man or something. I'm like, oh, what is he doing? And they're like, he's like, we're not, he's like, superheroes are here. And I'm like, what do you mean? And I looked at the channel, and it was all of us from our group, and it really insists on the story. And again, repeating that notion is that we're not waiting for people to save us. We're the folks doing that for ourselves and building ourselves up. So after 30 days, after 30 incredible days of going through this, we decided to end the hunger strike just due to our health and wanting to ground ourselves and build ourselves up again and restore our health and be where we need to be to keep going with this fight. And that's where we are now, you know, looking to create more community power, looking to create more internal power and building up our youth and ourselves. And right now pending, there's 2 city complaints that we're waiting to hear from. And recently, with one of the lawsuits, they decided not to push forward to delay the permit. But we're hopeful. We're hopeful because at the end of the day, we don't stop at this point. There's no way of stopping. People always ask, what are the next ways to help? Or what are the next things to expect? And things that you can always expect is for us to come back strong as a community, moving forward as a community. Because at the end of the day, we're the ones serving the community, protecting the community. That's the thing. And to mention this part, when it came to understanding how many industries there were in the neighborhood, we asked the city, the Southeast Environmental Task Force, asked the city how many industries are here in this community, and the city said we don't have the time or the resources to find that number out for you. So then they had a partnership with UIC through Catch, and then they investigated and they found over 70 industries, about 70 industries in our community having operations that cause, you know, cause contamination, cause pollution, and that all affects us. And having one more, we have to say no. So that's pretty much the journey we are right now. And, you know, I'm really grateful for having this platform. But again, we do this out of survival. We do this because we're hoping and we're fighting, and we don't stop fighting for our lives. We don't stop fighting for our health. And we do this because we deserve better. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Oscar, and thank you to all of the panelists for sharing your stories and showing off your superhero capes in this presentation. Now is the fun part where we get to interact with you guys and see answers to your questions. I see some of the panelists are typing answers into the questions, but we will take these in order. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. You can also raise your hand and we'll get to you in order. But let's kick off with Judy Bach's first question. What might be the best plan for developing the Southeast given that it's full of brownfields? Anyone want to take that on?
I can answer that. This is
Okay.
Peggy from the task force. The best plan, first off, is doing cleanup, remediation. We don't have any options. If those brownfields aren't cleaned up, we don't have options as to what can go on them. So we definitely need funding for cleanup because they are all contaminated in some manner. And so again, getting the funding for the cleanup. And in terms of development, if you recall from my presentation, there was the method plant. We would welcome that type of development, something that's enclosed, something that doesn't emit harmful pollutants into the air or the soil or the water. So that is the kind of development. We had assumed that the method plant set the bar when it was built, but we were wrong. And I think the city made a mistake by not insisting that any development going forward, any type of new construction should have been built in the same manner. And so again, that is what we think. Definitely cleanup has to be done first to make the land safe for everybody and for any type of development that goes on it.
Great. Thank you, Peggy. And I encourage people to keep chatting their questions, or you can also raise your hand. I also wanted to point out, because this is the Chicago Geographic Society, it wouldn't be complete if we added more maps to this. We want to make maps an integral part of this conversation. So the team has created a story map, and I'm going to put that link in the chat if you'd like to see other maps of the developments that the panelists talked about, as well as some of the stories and more images behind that. So feel free to take a look at your leisure. But let's go to the next question from Jason. Thank you for that question. Jason LaBrosse, how does the proximity to Northwest Indiana affect these various issues and groups?
I can answer that one also. Interestingly enough, there is a link. For example, the pet coke. Pet coke is the waste from the oil refinery that exists in Whiting, Indiana. So they process the crude oil over there, and the waste product gets shipped to us so that it can be stored and then shipped further out. But because it's stored and the way it was stored, it was putting PM10, PM2 emissions into the air that affect us. It was also washing into the river itself. So it does impact us. But not only BP, there is also the connection between the BP storage of asphalt. It comes from BP, the refinery right across the border. The manganese that was stored and is a neurotoxin and is a problem for us because they have found it in soil samples. They have found it in the Babe Ruth Little League field. The manganese is used in the steel industry, the pig iron, all of those things that are stored, that are transported along our river and stored in our community have other uses elsewhere. And a lot of them are right there in Indiana. And the other thing is we're also very cautious about not saying that if we don't want an industry, put it in Indiana. That's not how we operate. We don't want it. If it's not in our backyard, we don't want it in theirs. So again, there is definitely a connection between what we are dealing with and what people in Indiana have to deal with also.
Great, thank you, Peggy. Let's keep going down the line of questions. Back to Judy. What is the city or county to Illinois EPA doing to help mitigate the soil, water, and air pollution in the Southeast?
I could take some of that.
Okay.
So we currently, as I mentioned before, there were high levels of manganese identified on people's property, and they were also identified in the soil of a Little League field, as well as lead contamination of another Little League field. So they have been out there in terms of the Little League fields. They actually did some soil remediation. They dug up and removed the contaminated soils and replaced them, and that was just done very recently. But again, if we had not called attention, now you have to remember that we are the ones who have to call attention. The EPA and the IPA do not just come out here. They know that this is an industrial area. They don't take it upon themselves to come out here. We have to sound the alarm. We have to make the alert. It should not be that way. I think that is a major problem, but that is how it is. So we have to sound the alert. We have to put the pressure, and then they come out. They actually are supposed to also do some soil remediation about and around the manganese on people's properties. But as of yet, they have not done that. But the IEPA and Illinois EPA have been doing some air monitoring. Again, it almost seems like they have the data, they know about the issues, but it takes the community and people to put the pressure.
And I would definitely say that the picture that I had shown, or pictures I showed before, those were from the last action that a lot of groups from the Southeast side and a number of allies did to protest General Iron and the calling on the mayor to deny the final permit. So like Peggy said, the community has to get involved in order for any action to be taken at all. I know you were asking about the Illinois EPA, and I think it's very telling that for the Illinois EPA in terms of General Iron, for them to approve a permit while saying that, you know, we recognize that the East Side is an environmental justice community, but we're going to approve the permit anyway, is very telling about the type of community action that needs to be present for them to be able to move. And I know one of the things that we've been talking about for the Illinois EPA is that, you know, what they said for General Iron was that they could not take into account a cumulative effect, which means the total industries and the total amount of air pollution that is put out in the community, that they would not take that into effect. They would not take into account the EPA violations that they themselves had given the company. So they would not take into account any history of their violations nor city violations that the company had taken. They would not take into account community complaints because, like I said, the current residents in Lincoln Park have been complaining for years, and the air monitoring that they got was only in response after the community was organized. And I think, you know, right now, I think, you know, there needs to be movement to make sure that EPA, the Illinois EPA and the EPA is held accountable to those things, because it's not enough to be able to recognize that there are problems. They need to act on them. So, and the community that the General Iron is moving to is also, there's a large Spanish-speaking population, and the Illinois EPA refused to release any information in Spanish to the residents to let them know that the development was coming. So these are all things that, you know, the Illinois EPA, the city and Cook County have taken some actions, but it has only been in response to large scale community actions calling upon them to do their job. So,
Wow.
and then the link that Heather put in there shows not only information about the different developments that are going on the southeast side, where the toxic developments are, but it also shows for some of the developments, the ones that we've taken action on, it shows some community meetings or rallies or actions. So, FYI.
Excellent. And speaking of actions, let's jump to the next question. What kind of headway was made with the hunger strike, and is it still going on? And I'd like to add an addendum to this, because Oscar mentioned it was a 30-day hunger strike. But what's next? What are the hunger strikers thinking next?
Yeah, definitely. So what we accomplished was a lot. I mean, we've gotten responses from, I don't like saying older generation, I don't like saying older folks, but we got a lot of props from, you know, people we looked up to that were fighting this before us, like folks from the coalition about Pet Coke and part of, like, you know, campaigns fought before. I mean, we've always been fighting, and it was props like we haven't seen an outcome where we've got an national attention on this. So, you know, being able to have that done is really relieving. And it's amazing that we were able to actually, you know, accomplish all this. So we were able to really create, you know, hope and inspiration for our youth. Our youth see Chicago on the map now, not in a sense of like they see Chicago on the map, but they see the southeast side on the map. When they have, you know, when we were on front page on the covers, we always said it's the southeast side on the front covers. And, you know, from a community that never saw itself being highlighted in the news or anything going on, you know, we always said, like, we're being highlighted as the warriors and fighters that we are, you know, folks that are like fighting for what we deserve. So I think we created a lot of momentum in inspiring folks to join in. And what we're doing now is we're just preparing for what's to come. If there's a draft permit that is going to say, that's going to allow this company to come in, we're preparing for that. And if we win, we're also preparing for policy and legislation that we have to pass to keep protecting Black and rural communities from dirty industries.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Oscar. The next question is, to attract cleaner industries and help existing facilities run cleaner, what are community leaders doing to encourage local residents to study industrial engineering technologies? What industrial process related programs are offered at nearby community colleges?
I'll take that one. First off, I would like to say we have a community college that is local to us. It is Olive Harvey. And just to give you some idea of what type of courses they offer to communities like ours, their focus is logistics, and that'll tell you something about where they expect the jobs to flourish in our community. Logistics is nothing but warehousing and trucking. And we are at this time having a big developer put in 7 warehouses. And our concern there is not about the warehouses, but we thought that, number one, they could have been done in a more sustainable, energy efficient way. They could have employed some solar on their roofs, because we're talking massive warehouses. They could have employed a lot of green and tree planting and living walls and all of those wonderful things, but the city did not require them to, and they did not offer to do that. But in any case, we do have the logistics program at our local college. But we also have, and I think you'll all find this very interesting, we are the only city college that offers cannabis marketing. So just to give you an idea, that's what we're offered in our community. Also, as far as we're talking about encouraging residents to be engineers, our schools, we have currently overcrowded schools. We have schools that are literally falling apart. And we have been asking the Board of Education for new buildings. We've been asking the Board of Education for new buildings to house the students that are already overcrowded. So that is, of course, one of our complaints. We have a dismal educational system in this community. And again, we have the richest companies sited on the river, and there's no investment from those companies into our community. But of course, we will encourage and try to encourage our residents to become engineers for a multitude of reasons. And of course, we encourage those that are engineers to come to our community and work with us and bring ideas and offer up some solutions.
Thank you for that, Peggy. And that actually relates directly to the next question about accountability. Cleanup usually requires some taxpayer funding. How can legacy industry be held accountable and pay to clean up the pollution they caused?
I think maybe Peggy could talk about some of the legacy
Well,
industries.
I can definitely talk about that. When you talk about the steel mills, those companies are gone. They claim bankruptcy. They do everything they can to get out of having to be responsible for the contamination they left behind. So it's very hard to hold some industries accountable. And I will say this, I'll give you an example. Just the other day, we found out that there was a scrap metal yard that moved out of its location in Burnham, Illinois, which is close to us. And so, of course, we care about that area. We called the city of Burnham. We said, what can we do? I know there's contaminated, property that they're leaving behind. What can we do? How can we address this with that company? And Burnham, Illinois said they had no idea. I called the IEPA. They said they had no idea. So once again, here we have a company that picked up, moved, auctioned off the property to someone else. So they basically relinquished their responsibility, but I was trying to go after them while we knew that they were still there, and I had no success. Nobody could offer me any solutions of how we could do that. So it's very, very, very difficult, especially when people have to be taken to court because nobody wants to pay for all of that legal stuff. So there is no easy solution that I know of that exists right now on the books. Now, there needs to be some policy changes around that stuff.
I would also add that this is why, well, 2 things, that there needs to be policy changes like for the EPA to prevent toxic companies from coming into overburdened areas. But then this is also why things like community benefits agreements are really important for the developments that do come, because the community residents have identified what priorities are for the community. And I know one of the biggest things, there's 2, out of all the things, there's 2 things that always keep coming up in terms of developments. One is jobs and jobs training, so people actually can not only apply, but qualify for jobs or come in to the developments. But then the other thing is, to have green, sustainable building and technology. And for some communities, it's a nice thing to do. But for our community, we need it to be able to offset what is already here. The other thing too is, looking at the map of where investment has gone and not gone in terms of the city of Chicago using TIF funds. A lot of the TIF funds, our tax dollars, have gone to non-blighted communities on the north side. Those funding like that needs to be going into cleaning up some of the legacy pollution sites that are located in the southeast side. So that's why we say, we're looking at the $1 billion that Lincoln Park and Lincoln Yards and the 78 got. And then also looking at, Southworks, which is more than 3 times that area, not getting any remediation funds at all. So it's things like that that, we're looking at. So I think it's a little bit of, responsibility and accountability at each level for the legacy companies that have been here, that have moved out. Legacy companies are still here, longtime companies. And then also for new developments are coming in.
Got it.
I would like to add to that let's use General Iron as an example. They vacated the north side. It's going to be interesting to see who pays for the cleanup there, because there will be cleanup, I guarantee you. But so those are the things that we want people to be aware of.
Those are great points. Thank you. The next question is, given the pervasive problems, why would we not deal with this neighborhood as some communities do with flood zones and pay to move these families to other communities?
So I can answer that. I have a lot of history here. I've lived my whole life here. I would like to stay here, but I've often thought about that. If you're going to have industrial zones, then let's make them industrial zones, but you cannot have industry in the backyard of people's residences. Some industries just don't belong there. So that is something to consider if you want to relocate an entire community. But when we say relocate, that means you're going to preserve that area for industry only. We don't want you to move us out and then somebody else comes in, moves in, because that's not what we're about. We're not about putting it, be a burden on somebody else's shoulder. If we're going to have a solution, it has to be a solution that works for everybody, and nobody should have to deal with it once we're gone. So yeah, I've often thought about that. I mean, this is what city planning is about, and maybe that's something that should be given thought to. How they would accomplish that today, I don't know. Like I said, my roots are here, but that's the thought.
I would also say, we would have to take a look at what that would look like, because, we also know that a lot of folks have been leaving the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois in general. So they're losing tax base because of this. So I think, trying to moving a whole community is not as simple as just moving a family out, or even, 100,000 families out. It's about, where are you locating them? And I think one of the things that we've been talking about in terms of rebuilding this community is that folks want to live in the community. So you can't move them to a community that's not affordable. We don't want to move to a community that doesn't have amenities. And yeah, so I think that's the other thing too, is like, you don't want to move folks just for moving them and scatter folks to the four winds. I mean, what makes the Southeast side unique is that from any other place in Chicago is 2 things. One is that we have families that have been here generations, at least 2, if not 3 generations. Some families have been here since the turn of the century. So you talk about folks with long-term roots. But then, the other thing too is that for Chicago, we are also one of the most diverse communities in the state of Chicago. We have both African-American, Latinx, and white populations living together on the Southeast side. So that's also something that makes us unique and gives us a unique character.
One other obstacle would be also our natural areas. I mean, we could not encase them with industry unless they were protected. And if they were going to protect the natural areas, then they're protecting people. And so it's really one of the same. So they might as well just, look at this industrial corridor through a different lens and start thinking about how to improve it and not thinking about how to move us out. But I have thought of that, again, I'll be honest and say, I thought maybe we just need one massive 10th Ward industrial zone.
It's interesting to think about. There's a comment here about Invert, that they have a community engagement center and post the website where they can you can make appointments, or you can share your input. Do you guys have any comments on that?
Yeah, I can briefly describe the project. The project is one where they will be going 300 feet underground. They will be mining out the limestone. Once the mining is done, they intend to use the hollowed out area as a industrial complex. And it has been done other places, but the difference is in the places it has been done, the mines were already decommissioned and had been decommissioned. So they just repurposed them. Here, they're going to be mining, and after 17 years of mining out the limestone, then they may develop it into an industrial complex. But in the meantime, for 17 years, we will be dealing with more air emissions, more truck traffic, more barge and rail traffic. So we don't believe that's a good trade-off for something that may or may not happen 17 years from now.
All right. Thank you.
I think the other thing with Invert is, especially looking at their website, is I know looking at it, I felt like they took a lot of what the community has talked about in terms of priorities for green development and jobs and local hires and supporting small businesses, and use that to talk about the industrial complex. And we all, I know, no matter where you live, you've all seen developments that have been promised and they've been built up and they've been, great things. And then they don't come to pass. And so I think Peggy's point of it, waiting 17 years before we even get any possible, and I'm not saying I agree with it, but just if you look at a possible reward for this, I think is a long time. But I think my thought in looking at, their proposal is why in an overburdened community, working class, minority community, why do we have to continually be asked to pay our dues? Why do we have to always put up with toxic developments so that we can get the other amenities that most other communities take for granted? Why do we have to put, and we're always being told you have to pay your dues. Well, the Southeast side literally built the skyscrapers in Chicago, literally built downtown. We have been dealing with the pollution that's been left over from that. And so I think it's a slap in the face to continually push more toxic developments on the Southeast side, telling us we need to pay our dues before we get any of the amenities that a lot of other communities get without asking, like Lincoln Yards.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. Next up is, did anyone notice a change in the actions or behaviors of the EPA or other federal agencies during the previous presidential administration?
Okay, can I answer this one like a little bit?
Yes.
So I think the most hilarious part when it comes to the EPA, when we talked about the federal EPA during the Trump administration, what they were saying about Lori's actions, the Democrat, like we have to be really talk about political positions here. So during Trump's administration of the EPA, they called what Lori Lightfoot was doing in her administration environmental racism. If you are having a president who is known for lowering the standards of the EPA and you have the administration saying it's environmental racism, it really shows and spotlights the damaging effects that this mayor is doing if those standards are so low. That's one thing I just like to point out, and I'm sure Peggy can say more.
No, I can only say that I can't really, I don't know. I believe their hands were tied more, but it's hard for me to say because like I said, we've always had a hard time getting the EPA and IEPA to do what we thought they should be doing. It's always taken effort on our part. And it's a very hard thing to do because what people don't understand is when I use the term whack-a-mole, I have been at this from 2010, and almost every year there has been a new issue that we had to address. And after 10 years and 15 years, a community gets worn down. It gets tired. It's hard to keep that momentum. It's hard to keep people engaged. And yet it's falling on us to be the guardians of our community. And so that is where I say policy has to be changed, because the IEPA, EPA, and even the city of Chicago have to start putting some effort out. We should not be the ones alerting and sounding the alerts and pointing out the issues and trying to save our people and make our community healthier. It shouldn't fall upon us to have to do that.
And that actually relates directly to the next question of, is there any policy or legislation you're supporting that or would like to introduce to address environmental injustices and redlining?
We are currently working on some policy. I'm not at liberty to say right now, but if people will go to our Facebook page and follow us, we will let them know when they can take action and how they can support that. So yes, there is some stuff being done in the policy arena. We know that that's very important, and that's one of the things we do have to address and work on. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Agree. I think we'd like to see policies that would result in the Illinois EPA's decision for General Iron, like for that to never happen again. So for policies to stop putting toxic developments in overburdened communities, I think is the simplest way to put it. Those are the policies we need. And we also need policies to do the opposite, which is we need policies that would support the investment in communities and that developers actually listen to what residents want, and that residents have a real say in what development does and does not go on in our communities. So those are policies we'd like to see, and we've been working on.
So the policy that we're focusing on right now, the policy is basically centered on the permitting process. So that's what we're working on, just to let everyone know.
Got it. So stay tuned for more.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have time for one last question, which is there any chance of this area becoming a Superfund site? Not sure what that entails, but Waukegan Harbor was a Superfund site to clean out the heavy metals.
Well, we currently have 2 Superfund sites with the possibility of a third. The first one is called the cluster sites, and they have been working on it since, oh gosh, 2003, and it still isn't completely remediated. And interestingly enough, that cluster site, that Superfund site, is adjacent to the brand new bike park, the Big Marsh Bike Park. So we're hoping that we can put more pressure on them to complete the remediation. Once again, you know, it's a long process because they try to find, quote unquote, the responsible parties. And I don't know how many people know about that process, but try to find the responsible parties and then try to take those responsible parties to court, especially when the property has more than one responsible party. So that's the cluster sites. We recently just got a new site listed called the Shroud property. It is over 70 acres of slag that has been dumped. And there are no direct plans yet. The IEPA is just in the process of getting input from the community of what they would like to see there. And that's another type of process. So the problem with Superfund sites, from my experience, is that they can take 10 years or more before you actually see the cleanup. And so that's probably where policy needs to be changed some more.
Got it. Great, thank you. Well, we are almost out of time. And so I wanted to invite everyone to continue to explore the story map. I'm gonna share my screen because one of the questions was asking about contact information. And so this is the contact information for Alliance of the Southeast, as well as the Southeast Environmental Task Force. You can get updates on their Facebook pages, and also their email addresses are there. And I want to say a huge thank you to all the panelists for sharing their stories tonight, and a huge thank you to Jay and the staff and board, Chicago Geographic Society, for hosting this and for allowing all of us to share the latest updates from the Southeast side.